When was the last time you looked straight into the mirror and asked yourself, am I living my life? Not a life that earns admiration, not the stable job, the ideal relationship, or the lifestyle that makes society nod in quiet approval, but the type of life that brings peace when you're alone with yourself. No armor, no strain, no performance. We grow up under layers of expectation. Your family wants you to be safe. Your teachers want you to excel. Society wants you to be kind, well-mannered, and proper. Every expectation becomes a beautiful mask, but one that suffocates, and layer by layer, you drift further from your true self. You learn to live, to fit in, to be accepted, to not disappoint. But the price of always being the good person in others' eyes is the silence of your soul. Because every time you choose someone else over yourself, you're telling yourself, I don't matter. Carl Jung, the thinker who transformed how we understand ourselves, once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Becoming your true self is not a privilege everyone gets, because it demands you walk a path few dare to take. It asks you to let go of expectations, compromise, and pretense. It's not easy. It brings conflict, misunderstanding, and even loneliness. But that's the price you pay to live fully. Without halves, without default settings, choosing yourself is a quiet, powerful act. It's not rebellion. It's an inner declaration. From this moment on, I will no longer live just to be accepted. I will live to truly exist, and that is where the journey begins. Number 1. How society pulls us away from ourselves. We don't lose ourselves in a single clear-cut moment. There's no warning bell, no one pointing at us saying, from here on, you're starting to lose who you are. The process happens quietly, gradually, wrapped in what seems right. Obedience, achievements, praised kindness, celebrated self-sacrifice, and staying silent to keep the peace. Society doesn't need to force us to be the same. It simply rewards those who are similar often enough. And just like that, to belong, we learn to twist ourselves to fit the mold. We're taught that success means status, degrees, wealth, and having what many people dream of. But few ever stop to ask, is that what I truly need? The danger lies in this. The definition of success doesn't just come from outside. It's something we internalize, repeat, and eventually enforce on ourselves. We start chasing goals that don't belong to us. Over time, what we feel, what we want, and what truly moves us no longer get consulted in life's major decisions. Instead, we ask, what will others think? Or, will this look like failure in society's eyes? Carl Jung understood this better than most. He didn't see the ego as the enemy, but he recognized its greatest risk. When the ego is shaped entirely by society, it turns its back on the soul. He said, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. But the modern world is an outward-looking machine. It keeps us watching others, competing, comparing, and performing. And the more we look outward, the more we forget that there's a sacred space inside us being left behind. When you live to please others, to meet expectations, to avoid disappointing anyone, you're quietly sending a message deep into your unconscious. I don't matter as much as they do. Every time you ignore your inner voice in exchange for external approval, you sever a thread between yourself and your true being. Jung once warned, losing touch with the unconscious is losing touch with yourself. And when that connection is gone, no matter how much success you achieve, no matter how many eyes look at you with admiration, you will still feel empty. The world isn't out to destroy you. It just doesn't have time to ask who you are. And if you don't ask yourself that question, no one else will. Number 2. Discomfort is not random. It's a call from within. It's not by chance that you feel tired, restless, or lost in the very things you once chose. It's not because you're weak or lacking motivation, as people often say. These feelings aren't signals from the outside world. They come from within. They're the quiet but persistent knock of your unconscious, trying to wake you from a life that's drifting away from the center of who you truly are. Carl Jung understood that negative emotions aren't something to run from. They're the language of the unheard soul. When you feel confused, directionless, or indifferent to what once excited you, that's your soul whispering, something isn't right. Jung called this the tension between the conscious and the unconscious, a misalignment that creates an invisible but deeply felt unease. He once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, because every true awakening begins with a discomfort that refuses to be ignored." We often try to rationalize these feelings with excuses. Maybe I'm just tired. I should be grateful for what I have. I shouldn't ask for too much. But the truth is, if you have to constantly convince yourself to stay in something, maybe you no longer belong there. Spiritual exhaustion can't be solved by pushing hard. It's only healed when you dare to ask yourself, what am I living for? Jung believed the inner voice is a form of truth that logic can't replace. But he also knew that most of us don't shut it out because we can't hear it. We shut it out because we're afraid of what it might ask us to change. We fear uncertainty. We fear breaking what's familiar. We fear facing parts of ourselves we've never dared to acknowledge. Yet the irony is this. It's that fear that traps us, not our actual circumstances. So the real question to ask isn't, how do I stop feeling tired? It's, did my recent decisions come from truth or fear? And if the answer makes your heart sink a little, that's not failure. That's the beginning. Number 3. Understanding what it truly means to choose yourself. Choosing yourself has never been a selfish act. But in a society that glorifies sacrifice to the extreme, putting yourself first is often seen as betrayal. Betrayal of family, betrayal of duty, betrayal of the good person image others have projected onto you. So we learn to hide our real needs, true emotions, and honest dreams just to keep others comfortable. But the truth is, if you live just to be accepted, to play your role well, to not let anyone down in the end, you'll be the one most disappointed. Jung never advocated for selfishness or avoiding responsibility, but he saw the line between selflessness and self-abandonment. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, he once wrote, because only when you dare to face yourself fully can you offer yourself to the world completely. Not as a copy, not as a vessel for others' expectations, but as a whole human being with limits, emotions, and truth. Choosing yourself is an act of love, not avoidance. It's recognizing that if you're drained, you have nothing to give but fatigue, frustration, and wounded silence. When you learn to turn inward, to ask what you need, what feels true, what brings you peace, that's not weakness. That's the beginning of real growth. Choosing yourself means stopping the habit of making others happy at your own expense. It means restoring the order. I am the root. From me, all other connections can be truly nourished. And here's the strange thing. When you start living in alignment with who you are, the world begins to respond differently. Not because everyone suddenly understands or supports you, but because you stop being pulled toward things that no longer fit. The people who stay are the ones who accept the real you. The opportunities that follow match the new frequency you've stepped into. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that occur when you live in tune with your true self. Choosing yourself is the first step toward making everything else fall into place. None of us is made entirely of light, and none of us is made entirely of darkness. But what causes us pain isn't the darkness within us. It's the fact that we try to deny it, hide it, pretend it doesn't exist. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the part of ourselves we don't want to see, don't dare admit, and sometimes don't even realize we carry. The shadow isn't as evil or dangerous as we think. It's simply everything we've cut away from the good person identity we've tried so hard to build. Anger, jealousy, fear, shame, desire, the need for control, the feeling of helplessness. We bury it deep in the unconscious, hoping that if we ignore it long enough, it'll disappear. But the truth is, The shadow never goes away. It waits for its moment to erupt in overwhelming emotion, to show up in actions we can't control, or to manifest as a kind of emptiness we can't explain. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In other words, you don't grow by chasing positivity, development, or healing if you're still denying the darker parts of who you are. Real transformation begins when you find the courage to face your shadow, not to defeat it, but to acknowledge it as an inseparable part of you. When you start to accept the shadow, you realize you're not as bad as you fear, but also not as good as you once believed. You're human, contradictory, complex, and real. That moment when you stop fighting yourself is when the energy you've been using to hide, avoid, and suppress finally gets released. That energy can now become creativity, connection, and peace. Facing the shadow is a turning point, not because it changes who you are, but because it brings you back to your true self, undefended, unfiltered, whole. And only then can you stand firm within yourself, no longer needing approval or fearing judgment. You no longer need to be validated to know you're worthy, because you've seen the darkest part of yourself, and you still chose to stay. There's something strangely profound that only those who dare to choose themselves truly understand. The feeling of not returning to a place, a memory, or a person, but returning to yourself, a quiet, yet deeply stirring reunion. It's not loud, not explosive, not a movie scene moment that makes you burst into tears, but it makes you breathe deeper, stand firmer, and for the first time in years feel in the right place. When you choose yourself, the first thing you gain isn't applause. It's clarity. The previous fog, the confusion, and the sense of being lost begins to lift. Not because you've found the perfect plan, but because you've stopped drifting from your center. You begin to sense what lightens you and what makes your body tense. You start to see the subtle but crucial difference between what you should do and what feels right to you. Decisions that once left you tangled now become clear. Not because you know the outcome, but because you're no longer choosing from fear. You're choosing from alignment. From that clarity, something else begins to grow. Purpose. Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart." Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. Many people spend their whole lives searching for the meaning of life, as if it's some distant destination. But for those who choose themselves, purpose isn't something to be found, and it's something you return to. When you live in truth, aligned with your authentic self, that way of living becomes the purpose. You no longer do things just to reach a future outcome. You do them because they're right. After all, they resonate with your inner rhythm. Life stops being a never-ending chase and becomes a flow you move with. And the most precious, quiet, yet lasting thing you receive when you choose yourself is inner peace. Not the kind that comes from a 15-minute meditation or a few soothing affirmations, but a deep, steady peace that isn't easily shaken by circumstances, opinions, or change. Because when you're living truthfully, you don't need to tense up. You don't need to tweak yourself to fit into a more acceptable version. You don't have to go on the defensive every time someone disagrees. You're no longer trying to become someone. You are simply being, and that's where peace begins. Not because life is easier, but because you've stopped fighting yourself. From that peace, a powerful ability emerges. The ability to say no without guilt. Once, saying no may have made you feel ashamed, afraid of being judged, or afraid of letting others down. But now you understand, every time you say yes to what isn't right, you're saying no to yourself, and you no longer want to do that. Jung called this spiritual maturity the moment you know your limits and dare to honor them. You stop agreeing just to avoid conflict. You stop complying just to maintain an image. You understand that saying no doesn't make you bad, it makes you honest. And that honesty is worth more than any approval you might gain. In the end, all of this adds up to one thing, something everyone longs for, but few truly reach. Real freedom. Not freedom of movement, geography, or choice, but freedom within. You no longer live to meet someone else's standard. You're no longer controlled by the fear of being abandoned, of not being good enough, not having enough, not being nice enough. You can fail without collapsing, be misunderstood without explaining, lose something, and still not lose yourself, because you now know who you are, where you come from, and what's true for you. This kind of freedom doesn't bring applause, it doesn't guarantee safety, and it won't always please everyone, but it gives you something nothing else can replace, the feeling of being alive, not just getting through the days, not playing a role, not surviving just to maintain an image, but living with presence, emotion, and intention. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And every time you choose yourself, you're reaffirming that truth, that you are no longer bound by the past, by expectations, or by anyone else's definition. You may not be understood by everyone. You might outgrow certain people, step away from old lifestyles, or let go of things that once felt important. But what you gain, though invisible, is deeply real. Clarity, purpose, peace, the power to say no, and inner freedom. These are the foundations of a life that isn't just right, but rich, meaningful, and worth living. And it all begins with one seemingly simple thing: the courage to choose yourself. Number 6. How do you begin this journey? Beginning the journey back to yourself doesn't require you to let go of everything, radically change your life, or attain some enlightened state. More often than not, this journey starts with something deeply human. A vague discomfort, a persistent unease, a nameless sadness. In today's world, where everyone is busy, performance is prioritized, and emotions are often sidelined, these inner signals are easy to ignore. But for Carl Jung, these states are not disturbances to be avoided, but meaningful messages from the depths of our unconscious. Jung viewed the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious as two foundational levels of the human psyche. The personal unconscious contains memories, emotions, and experiences we've forgotten or suppressed, often the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. The collective unconscious, even deeper, is the shared psychological layer of humanity, housing archetypes, myths, and ancient behavior patterns we inherit as part of our nature. It is often in moments of inner conflict, when our outer life no longer aligns with our inner state, that the unconscious begins to speak. Carl Jung emphasized, who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens. This is not poetic fluff, if it's the core of his entire approach to psychoanalysis. Awakening doesn't come from seeking outside validation, but from the courage to look inward and observe what's happening beneath the surface of awareness. Jung didn't view behavior, decisions, or emotions as random. To him, every reaction was a clue pointing towards something deeper we need to understand. So, how do you begin? The answer lies in the practice of inner observation on what Jung called active imagination. This is a technique where you consciously engage with inner images, emotions, and symbols that arise from the unconscious. When you feel lost, notice what images keep appearing in your dreams, what thoughts return when you're alone, or what emotions flare up without a clear cause. These aren't random, they're how your unconscious is trying to communicate with you. Dreams, in particular, are often the most accessible starting point. Jung called them the door to the unconscious, where the unintegrated parts of yourself appear in symbolic form. If you dream of being stuck, chased, or lost, it may be a reflection of your internal fragmentation. When you pay attention to these dreams and write them down, you're beginning to reconnect with the forgotten parts of your soul. Jung also emphasized the role of intuition, one of the 4 psychological functions in his typology, alongside thinking, feeling, and sensing. Intuition is not vague guesswork, but a deeper form of knowing that doesn't follow linear logic. It operates through symbolic perception. When something feels off, Despite being rational on the surface, that feeling deserves attention. Intuition is often the unconscious's first voice, subtle, quiet, but undeniably real. Jung warned that if we don't listen to the unconscious, it will continue to shape our lives without our awareness. One of his most well-known quotes is, "Till you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is not just a warning, it's an invitation to wake up. If you don't consciously look within, the parts of yourself you haven't understood will end up guiding your behavior, your choices, even your relationships, without your knowledge. So, to begin this journey, start with awareness. When something triggers an outsized anger, pause and ask, where is this coming from? When you feel disconnected, ask, what am I forcing myself to maintain that no longer feels true? And in your quietest moments, ask, what part of me have I been abandoning? You can keep a small notebook to record your feelings, your dreams, or the moments when your intuition makes you pause. You don't need immediate answers. Just noticing is already a step toward healing. That's the moment you stop ignoring yourself. That's the moment you begin to come home. There is no fixed path, no right or wrong. There is only one guiding principle: honesty. Honesty about what hurts. Honesty about the desires you've buried. Honesty about the parts of yourself you once labeled as weak. And that honesty will slowly begin to open the door to a deeper connection with who you are. Jung never promised that this journey would be easy, but he believed that no path to wholeness could bypass the unconscious. And once you start to listen, once you are willing to sit still with the uncomfortable truths within, you will realize you never truly lost yourself. You were always there, just waiting for the moment you'd be brave enough to return. Number 7, the challenges will come, and you must stay grounded. No one tells you that once you start living authentically, the world will applaud. The opposite is often true. When you begin to put yourself first, start saying no to what no longer feels right. Start being honest with yourself and others. The first thing you encounter isn't freedom, it's conflict. People may not understand. Those who were used to the version of you that was agreeable, considerate, always available, may feel you've changed too much. They might say you're selfish, cold, or distant, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're no longer doing what made them comfortable. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that truth doesn't just apply to you, it applies to those around you. When you begin to live truthfully, you unintentionally become a mirror, reflecting to others how they've avoided doing the same, and that discomfort can trigger resistance. You will also feel lonely, not because no one is physically there, but because you are stepping away from your former self, the version that was accepted by society, loved by friends, and approved by family. But it was also the version that left you exhausted, disconnected, and unable to recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. When you dare to shed that version, you enter a temporary void where the old no longer fits, and the new has yet to fully take form. That space is the necessary solitude in which you begin to be reborn. During this time, doubt will arise. You'll ask yourself, am I being too stubborn? Am I hurting others? Is living authentically just too much to ask for in this world? All these questions are normal because you're leaving the psychological comfort zone where beliefs, behaviors, and relationships were all shaped by others and walking into a journey without a pre-written map. Carl Jung referred to this phase as an inner war, the friction between two parts of yourself, the conscious self that longs for change and the unconscious that wants everything to stay the same. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Spiritual awakening for Jung never begins in comfort. It begins with the necessary breaking of old patterns." That's why he emphasized, there is no transformation of darkness into light and of apathy into movement without emotion. No transformation is possible without emotion, and often the first emotions are discomfort, sadness, anger, and fear. When you begin to say no, when you stay silent instead of explaining, when you stop supporting things you no longer believe, you'll see who stays because they value your truth and who only stayed when you played a role. It hurts, but it's necessary. Jung believed that individuation in the process of becoming truly oneself is not just personal development, but a revolutionary act of courage because you are peeling away the layers society placed on you to step into your whole, original, and often neglected self. Transformation doesn't happen inside comfort zones. Jung stressed this not as a motivational slogan, but as a deep psychological truth. The ego protects itself by clinging to the familiar, even if that familiarity causes pain. So to change, you must break through your natural resistance. You must face the voice in your head that says, just endure a little longer. What if no one accepts the real me? What if I lose everything by being honest? And yes, you may lose some things, but what you gain is far more important. You will stop trading your inner peace for the sake of preserving things built on pretense. And once you've tasted the freedom of being fully yourself, even if only for a fleeting moment, you won't want to return to the old way of living. Remember, there's nothing wrong with feeling lonely. There's nothing wrong with doubting. There's nothing wrong with being tired. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of movement. You are standing at the edge between who you used to be and who you are becoming. And this journey, however slow or difficult, is the truest path forward. Not everyone will walk with you. Not everyone will understand. But the very act of choosing to stand alone, if that's what it takes, is the loudest declaration you can make. I matter enough to live truthfully, and it is in this moment that life begins to shift from the inside out. Number 8. The ripple effect. How your truth transforms the world around you. Most of us begin the journey back to ourselves as a personal pursuit, a way to finally live for ourselves. But what often takes us by surprise is this. When you dare to live truthfully, the world around you begins to shift, not with loud, dramatic change, but through subtle, powerful, and lasting transformation. The first and most visible change appears in your relationships. When you begin to live honestly, you start attracting people who are aligned with your frequency. This doesn't mean they're just like you, but that they resonate with the energy of authenticity. And that energy becomes the foundation for a real connection. Relationships once held together by performance or pressure start to dissolve, not because you're abandoning anyone, but because you're no longer pretending to hold them close. The silence between people who are no longer real with each other becomes undeniable. But alongside that, new relationships will emerge, fewer, but deeper and more nourishing. In these spaces, you no longer have to adjust yourself to be loved. In family dynamics, the shift becomes even more evident when you stop acting like the perfect child, the enduring wife, or the man who must never be weak. You begin to break generational cycle patterns that those before you were also trapped in. You begin to say no to imposed expectations. You begin to share your real emotions. And in doing so, you redefine what love looks like, not as a silent sacrifice, but as mutual presence. It's no longer about enduring one another, but about showing up fully and honestly on both sides. The impact is even greater when it comes to your children. Children don't learn by instruction, they learn through the energy they feel. When you live truthfully, you teach them without saying a word that emotions aren't to be hidden, that boundaries deserve respect, and that self-worth comes not from being perfect, but from having the courage to be who they are. You don't have to parent well, according to some manual. You just have to live in alignment with yourself, and your very presence becomes the deepest form of nourishment. Jung once said, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent." This is why when you begin to heal yourself, you're clearing a path so your child doesn't have to carry what you once carried. Beyond family, in your workplace or community, the presence of one truthful person can quietly plant seeds of awakening. They may not speak much, but their energy inspires others, not because they're more talented or impressive, but because they are clear within themselves. They don't manipulate. They don't people please. They don't compete. And that clarity makes others pause and wonder, how can someone be that at peace? When you dare to say, I don't know, I'm not okay, or I need time, you're not being weak. You're modeling a different way of being. You're permitting others to be real, to be uncertain, to ask questions. In a society exhausted from pretending to be strong, honest vulnerability becomes the antidote. And you, by simply refusing to hide, create a space where others can begin to heal. The more people live authentically, the more rigid social norms begin to soften. Jung didn't believe in changing the world through surface-level protest. He believed in transformation from within each individual, because the individual is the cell of the collective. He wrote, "The individual is the only reality." The further we go in understanding the individual, the more we will understand the world. The world doesn't change from the outside in, it changes from the inside out. Starting with you, with me, with each small, truthful choice made daily. Imagine this: if you set clear boundaries, someone else might feel empowered to do the same. If you admit you're scared, someone beside you might finally feel relief knowing they're not alone. If you express what you truly need, someone else might be inspired to ask themselves that very question. You don't have to speak for everyone. You don't have to be a leader. You just have to be a single flame, and the light will spread from your quiet, honest presence. And so, a person who lives truthfully doesn't just transform themselves, they shift the entire space around them. They open doors to honest conversations. They activate healing in others. Over time, they help create small communities where sincerity replaces performance, where people truly see one another and stay. That is how, by choosing yourself, you begin to ripple into circles far larger than yourself. Before you end this, ask yourself one simple question with complete honesty. What am I still holding on to that no longer serves me? It might be a relationship you're maintaining out of fear of change, a job you're staying in just because it feels safe, a lifestyle, a label, an outdated expectation you believe you're supposed to keep. But look directly at it. Does it still nourish you? Or are you just preserving a version of yourself that no longer feels like you? Carl Jung once said, "We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." You don't have to reject the past. You don't have to disown the parts of your life that helped you survive. But the time has come to be brutally honest with yourself. What are you continuing to sustain? And does it still feel true for you today? Choosing yourself means choosing to live truthfully. It's not an empty slogan. It's a daily act. Concrete, subtle, and deeply personal. It's when you listen to your real emotions, instead of forcing yourself to feel fine. It's when you say no, even though you know it might disappoint someone. It's when you dare to pause, to walk away, to begin again, even when no one cheers you on, even when there are no guarantees of what lies ahead. Because what matters most isn't the outcome. What matters is that you choose your truest self to be your compass. And that choice, step by step, begins to change everything. You don't need to do it all in one day. You don't need to become someone who is fully awakened. This journey isn't measured by speed. It's measured by honesty, by persistence, by your willingness to return to yourself no matter how many times you've strayed. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you feel it's too late. Maybe you're wondering, am I strong enough to keep going? And if that's where you are right now, know this: you are not alone. There are so many others, some sitting right beside you, some far across the world, quietly walking this path too. They're also learning to listen, learning to let go, learning to accept that being imperfect doesn't make them unworthy of living truthfully. Every time you choose yourself, you change the world not with noise but with resonance, not with power but with presence, not with grand gestures but with a life truly lived without hiding, without pretending, without betraying your soul. And if you've been waiting for a sign to begin, to keep going, or to come home, this is it. If this message speaks to you, leave a comment. I'm ready to choose myself. You're not just writing it for yourself, you're adding strength to others who are on the same path. And if you know someone who might need this reminder of their worth, share this video with them. Because of you, someone may finally find their way back to themselves.